There is a question that has haunted American legal history for decades, not just because of the crime it surrounds, but because of what it implies. What if the man who committed a murder wasn't entirely the one in control? What if something had moved into him, settled deep inside, and waited? What if the most disturbing thing about the case of Arne Cheyenne Johnson isn't the killing itself, but everything that came before it? This is not a ghost story told around a campfire. This is a true crime case from the state of Connecticut. A case that passed through courtrooms, newspapers, and living rooms across America. A case that forced ordinary people, judges, lawyers, journalists, and neighbors to ask a question most of them had never seriously considered. Can a demonic entity be held responsible for murder? The year was 1980. The setting was Brookfield, Connecticut, a quiet New England town. The kind of place where nothing unusual was supposed to happen. The Glatzel family had recently moved into a rental home, and for a while, everything seemed normal. But normal, it seems, was already running out of time. It started with the youngest member of the family. David Glatzel was 11 years old when the family first moved into that home. By most accounts, he was an ordinary boy, quiet, somewhat shy, the kind of kid who didn't draw much attention to himself. But shortly after moving in, something began to change. David started complaining that something was watching him, something he could see but no one else could. He described it as an old man, a figure with a deformed face, jagged teeth, and hollow eyes, a creature that didn't walk so much as drift, a presence that came to him in the dark and wouldn't leave. At first, his family assumed it was nightmares. Children have vivid imaginations, especially in unfamiliar places. But the complaints didn't stop. They escalated. David began waking up, screaming. He would go rigid without warning. His voice would change, dropping into registers. That didn't sound like an 11-year-old boy. He started quoting passages from the Bible and from the book of Job, passages he had no reason to know and no way of having memorized. His body bore marks that no one could fully explain, scratches that appeared across his skin without any clear source. Then came something harder to dismiss. There were moments when David's body appeared to move in ways that defied ordinary explanation. Witnesses within the family claimed to have seen the boy lifted from his bed, as though something invisible had taken hold of him, his back arching, his feet leaving the mattress. Family members who witnessed these moments described a particular kind of terror, not the panic of an accident or a medical emergency, but something colder. The feeling that whatever was happening to David was intentional. The Glatzel family turned to the Catholic Church. Priests were brought in. Religious rites were performed. But the manifestations didn't stop. If anything, they intensified. David would thrash and growl. He would spit. He would speak in voices that didn't belong to him, addressing the priests by name, taunting them, saying things that a child his age should not have known how to say. The entity David claimed to see had a name, and according to those present, it announced itself more than once. It was at this point that the Warrens entered the picture. Ed and Lorraine Warren were already well known in paranormal investigation circles. By 1980, Ed was a self-described demonologist, Lorraine claimed to be a clairvoyant. Together, they had built a reputation over decades of investigating cases across New England, cases that would eventually become the foundation for the Conjuring film franchise. When the Glatzel family reached out to them, the Warrens came to Brookfield. Lorraine Warren later described what she witnessed in that home as among the most disturbing experiences of her long career. She spoke of an atmosphere inside the house that felt physically oppressive, a heaviness that settled on the chest, a coldness that didn't respond to heat. She described seeing David in states of apparent possession that she had no rational explanation for. Ed Warren documented the events with recordings and written observations, building a case file that he believed represented genuine demonic infestation. Over the following weeks, a series of exorcism attempts were performed on David Glatzel. These were not casual rituals. They were extended, exhausting, and by all accounts, deeply disturbing to everyone present. The sessions would leave those involved shaken in ways they struggled to articulate afterward. And through all of it, one person kept showing up, one person who seemed to feel something particular about what was happening to David, something almost personal. His name was Arne Cheyenne Johnson. He was 19 years old. He was engaged to David's older sister, Debbie Glatzel. He had no background in theology or the occult. He was, by all descriptions, a normal young man from a working-class background who had simply found himself in the middle of something he didn't understand. But rather than pull away, Arne moved closer. During one of the exorcism sessions, something happened that those present would later describe as a turning point. Arne, watching the ritual, watching the child he'd come to care for, being tormented by something invisible, reportedly spoke out loud to the entity. He challenged it. He told it to leave David alone and come to him instead. Whether those words were meant as a genuine invitation or were simply the emotional outburst of a young man at his limit, no one can say for certain. But according to the Warrens and several members of the Glatzel family, the entity accepted. David's episodes began to subside, and Arne Johnson began to change. The changes were gradual at first, then impossible to ignore. People who knew Arne well described a man who seemed increasingly not himself. His moods shifted without warning. He would fall into trances, standing completely still, staring at nothing, unresponsive to people, speaking directly to him. He would growl, he would snarl, his eyes would take on an expression that the people around him described as empty, not angry, not sad, not anything recognizably human. Those who witnessed these episodes said it didn't feel like watching someone having a breakdown. It felt like watching someone being replaced. Debbie Glatzel, his fiancée, watched this happen and grew increasingly frightened. She later said that there were moments when she looked at Arne and genuinely did not recognize the person looking back at her. The man she loved seemed to be disappearing not all at once, but piece by piece, as though something was quietly moving in and pushing him out. On February 16th, 1981, Arne Cheyenne Johnson went to work. He was employed at a kennel in Brookfield, and that day he was at the property of Alan Bono, his landlord and the owner of the kennel. By most accounts, the day began unremarkably, but at some point, Arne entered a state that witnesses described as a trance. He became agitated, his behavior turned erratic, and then, in a moment that would alter the trajectory of his entire life. Arne Johnson pulled out a knife and stabbed Alan Bono multiple times. Bono died from his wounds. Arne was arrested. He was 22 years old. What followed was unlike any murder trial in American history. Arne Johnson's defense attorney, Martin Minella, announced that he intended to argue that his client was not guilty by reason of demonic possession. The devil made him do it, that was, in plain terms, the argument. Arne himself did not claim he was innocent of the act. He claimed he was not in control when he committed it. The reaction in the courtroom was one of stunned disbelief. Legal scholars weighed in from across the country. Religious authorities were divided. Some priests and theologians took the claim seriously, arguing that the documented events involving David Glatzel were too extreme to dismiss. Others in the church warned against using the faith as a legal strategy. Skeptics pointed out and continue to point out today that possession is not a medical or legal category, that there is no standard of proof for demonic influence that a court could apply, that allowing the defense would open a door that no one could ever close again. The judge agreed. Before the trial even reached the question of possession, the judge ruled that the demonic defense was legally inadmissible. The supernatural explanation would not be allowed in the courtroom. Arne Johnson was tried on the facts of the killing alone. He was convicted of first-degree manslaughter. He was sentenced to 10 to 20 years in prison. He was released after serving approximately 5 years. The case did not disappear when the gavel came down. If anything, it grew larger in the public imagination. Newspapers across America had covered it with a mixture of fascination and unease. Television news segments tried and failed to find a satisfying frame for what had happened. Was it a tragic crime committed by a disturbed young man? Was it a cynical legal strategy built around religious mythology? Or was there something in that Connecticut home, something that moved through David Glatzel and into Arne Johnson that no secular institution was equipped to address? The Warrens maintained until their deaths that what happened was real. Lorraine Warren, who outlived her husband by many years, never wavered in her account of the Glatzel case. She described it as one of the most verified examples of demonic possession she had ever encountered. The Glatzel family's story has been told and retold, though not always consistently in later years. David Glatzel himself pushed back against some versions of the narrative, raising questions about how his experience was characterized and used. The case remained lodged in the public consciousness for decades, and then, in 2021, it returned to the mainstream in a way no one in that Connecticut town could have anticipated. Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It, brought the story to a global audience of millions. The film dramatized the events surrounding David's possession, Arne's challenge to the entity, the murder, and the trial. It was a box office hit. It introduced a new generation to a case that had never truly been resolved. What the film couldn't do, what nothing can fully do, is answer the question at the center of it all. Because here is what remains true. 40 years later, a boy was terrorized in his home by something his family could not explain. A young man was changed in ways that those closest to him found deeply unsettling. A man was killed, and the person convicted of that killing went to court and said, not as a metaphor, not as a figure of speech, but as a legal argument, that he was not alone when he did it. Mental illness can explain altered behavior. Trauma can explain personality changes. Suggestibility can explain a frightened child who begins to perform what is expected of him. Grief and desperation can explain a family that reaches for the supernatural when nothing else makes sense. There are rational frameworks for every piece of this story, and yet, the scratches that appeared on David's skin, the things he said that he had no way of knowing, the recordings that the Warrens made during those sessions, the testimony of the priests who performed the exorcism, the people in that room who came away changed not by what they believed, but by what they saw. The question is not whether you believe in demons. The question is whether the people in that house had a reason to. And whatever your answer, whatever framework you use to hold this story together, there is one thing that cannot be argued away. A man is dead. A boy was traumatized. A young man spent years in prison. And somewhere in the town of Brookfield, Connecticut, in a house that still stands, a story began that has never fully ended. Some doors, once opened, do not close easily. Some invitations, once extended, cannot simply be taken back. Arne Johnson stood in that room and told something to leave the child and come to him instead. And whatever it was, illness, delusion, grief, or something older and darker than any of those words, it seems to have taken him at his word. And if you enjoyed this story, make sure to hit that like button. Share this video with a friend who loves creepy stories. And don't forget to subscribe and press the bell icon, because this is just the beginning. The next story might be darker, and you won't want to miss it.